Hi everyone.
Hello, happy day guys who were able to join us. Um, Welcome to our webinar about how to use personas to build great products. The reason why we chose this topic was because we see a lot of people struggling with personas and struggling to make them really work for them. So, and by digging deep on that, what we've discovered with teams is that they are using different types of personas to get the results, and so they are not able to get consistent results. At the same time, we see a lot of people talking about customer experience and the importance of empathizing with the client, and personas are a great tool for that. So we want to go through what are the common challenges that these teams are facing and how we can improve and make personas useful to build great products. But before we get into that, we're going to present ourselves. Um, have my colleague Mark with me.
Hi, I'm Mark, and I develop courses and content for VFQ, as well as consult for Emergent. It's something I'm really passionate about, and I'm excited to host this first webinar of 2017 with Pedro. I really enjoy helping people adopt new ways of working, so I'm glad to be sharing some of that today.
And I'm Pedro. Um, I work with Mark developing products and consulting with companies, mainly on the innovation and product management space. And we're happy to be here. So,
We both work for Emergent, and as we like to say, our goal is to help clients improve the way that they work forever. That really involves continuously making working practices better. One of our approaches is to support and empower people to deliver change from within their own organization. And we use that using Value Flow Quality, which is our education brand, where we work with the team internally and with the rest of our emerging consultants to bring learning to action with our clients. This work-based approach is about teaching the theory, but then also applying the new tools in practice and applying it to the context of everybody's day-to-day work. For the past few years, we've been developing courses and coaching around topics like agile and product management. And we've been doing that with our enterprise clients and helping them reshape their organizations to focus on value, flow, and quality as outcomes. More recently, we've also been extending this to our online courses, which you'll hear about a little bit later.
as for today's agenda, we're going to be covering what's on screen. So, what are personas? What different types of personas exist and their uses? What we've learned working with our clients and with the teams and coaching those teams. Common challenges of using personas, and finally, how we can overcome some of those challenges. Of course, we are aware that there are going to be a lot of questions. Traditionally, there are. So there's going to be space for Q&A at the end. But feel free to make your questions as you think of them and as you go along, and we'll get to that at the end of our webinar.
And so while we won't be covering in depth how to actually build personas in this webinar, there is a section in our online course that covers it, and you can get that bit for free on our website. You can find out more and sign up for a free course in understanding your customer at valueflowquality.com.
So, what are personas?
Good point. Before we start, it's good to get an understanding of what personas are. You'll find that the definition varies, but typically a persona is a representation of a customer or a user that can be used within an organization to drive the understanding of the people responsible, really, for keeping your business afloat. We really think that the power of a persona lies in its ability to help teams create more empathy for their users, and in turn that can support decision making and allow people to better communicate with different stakeholders exactly who the target is for your product or service. The most common one, and the one that traditionally shows up when you Google personas, is the one that you can see on the right just now. And we're going to cover three main types of persona next.
So, the reason why there's some confusion sometimes with personas and they tend to be a tough tool for teams to work with is because there are different types of personas, mainly three: the marketing persona, the proto persona, and the design persona. So, with the marketing persona, which was the one that was just on screen before, the main goal of this type of persona is to give an overview of who your user is, right? So it's not focused on a specific problem. It gives you that overview that it's based on things like age, hobbies, and all of those, which is the first thing that you can see when you Google it. And it's mainly aimed for sales and marketing efforts and that kind of stuff. So it serves this purpose. But then there's other types of personas, like the user persona, and this is more focused in solving user problems. This is the one that is used mostly for user design and more developing new products kind of efforts. So these are focused on goals, pains, and behaviors, and the jobs to be done that the customers have. So they target a specific problem, and they are traditionally the output of user research, primary and secondary research, be it qualitative or quantitative. These user personas are the ones that should be used when you actually want to solve a specific problem. And the last one is the product persona. This is the result.
Proto persona.
The proto persona. It's the result of secondary research and educated guesses by the teams. So it's the knowledge that we already have from dealing with clients and talking to people. But this type of persona, it likes validation most of the times. Yes, we do have some knowledge by years and years of experience, but it's only good as a starting point because it requires further research. So it's not solely based in assumptions. And because different people have different sets of knowledge and different assumptions, it can create confusion in communication. So we always advise these to be backed by research afterwards.
So what have we learned? Well, Pedro and I and the rest of the team here at Immersion spent a lot of time with a lot of different clients, and these are some of the things that we've really observed. So traditionally, we see teams in an organization using a persona that runs across the entire organization. They're usually developed centrally or by an external party. They traditionally take the shape of the marketing personas that we described at the start and have all the benefits and the disadvantages that they cause. Whilst we're going through this, it's useful for yourselves to reflect on the types of personas that you use, and you can let us know in the comments which ones you really tend to use or have seen other people using. Really what we're talking about here, though, is about developing great products, and for that means we need to be solving the problems of our users in a way that delights them. So with that in mind, the next section is all about the common challenges of using personas.
So again, from dealing with teams and with our clients, what we see, these are the common challenges that we see. So using the wrong type of personas, not building it based on data. We'll go through them one-on-one, and let's start with using the wrong type of personas. So these are personas that are anchored on the wrong type of data or data that is not relevant. To give you an example, is a little bit like using a marketing persona to do user research, right? So this is a common mistake that we see. And it was interesting because we gave a talk a couple of months ago, and while we were starting the talk, we were informed that most of the people that were present, they had training on how to build personas. So we thought that was going to be a section that was going to be a little bit useless for them, but it ended up being really interesting because the first reaction I got after I finished the talk was, someone came up to me and said, well, that explains why personas are not being really useful for me, because knowing if someone earns 50K a year, loves dogs, and is 35 years old, doesn't really help to understand how you should be interacting with a software suite, for example. So using the wrong type of personas creates confusion within teams, within stakeholders, might make you make decisions for the wrong reasons. So this is one of the main ones.
Another one that we've identified is personas that aren't built around a specific problem. So we talked about using the wrong type of persona, but even when people use the right type of persona, we see them developing them in the wrong way. So if the goal is to solve for a specific problem, then personas should be built with that in mind. Otherwise, they tend to just be exploratory pieces of work. Fine if that's the goal, but you just need to be aware of that. So if you think about a complex role like managing a retail store, the amount of information and parameters that you could collect about the store managers is vast. And they could remove your focus from the problem that you're trying to solve for them. So are they struggling to know which items are selling out? Are they struggling to know where their staff are in the store? Do they have enough checkouts open? In cases like that, you really need to narrow the personas to focus on the specific problems that they're experiencing. And as soon as you feel you have enough information about that context, you can then start building those personas.
Another of the common problems is building personas based on no data, right? This is when there's no proof and everything, there's an assumption. And it happens a lot when we go to client side and we talk with the people that we train. We ask them, do you know your client? And the answer is traditionally yes, we really know our client. We have those personas as well that are organization-wide, and we know who our client is. But when we ask, when was the last time you actually spoke to a client, then it's when the silence happens, and there's that awkward moment where they actually realize they haven't been talking to the clients or their users. So if no one has spoken to the client, the possibility is high, the probability is high that they don't really know what are the real issues. They might have a guess, and they might know for the experience that they have within the business. But do you really want to make decisions based on someone's opinion or educated guess, or should we be supporting it with more data that is taken directly from interacting with the customer or the user?
Personas that never change are another challenge that we encounter quite frequently. So personas are supposed to be dynamic. To develop an interface or a product, a web app 10 years ago or today, you'll know that your users will have significantly different needs, they'll be using different technology, etc. So the context is really relevant, and any change in that context means that your personas need to change as well. This is pretty hard work. Trying to keep things up to date is something that even the best companies in the world fail at. In a visit to a client site recently, we saw the best persona work we'd seen in a while, but then when we actually got down to congratulating the teams, they did say that they hadn't updated them in over a year. So bearing in mind the current political, economic climate, etc., and the speed at which consumer behavior is changing, it's wise to think that yesterday's user might not be the same as today's user, and it's imperative to continue to refresh your persona as new insights are gained.
Another common problem that we see a lot is outsourcing this type of work. So a lot of companies tend to hire a design firm to build the personas. It's typical behavior. But what we traditionally ask as well is, and to understand what the risk is, do you really trust the output that that company is going to provide you? Do you really trust that they will understand the exact problem you are trying to solve and what you want to uncover from your users? Do you trust that your team will be able to empathize with whatever output they produce? Because if there's no real empathy for the user, you can't really produce something that they will actually love and will want to use. So if you really need an external party, at least make sure that someone in your team is following along all the time. But we tend to advise to bring this process in-house and to learn how to do it.
The last one is personas that are too similar. If you only have one persona, or the personas that you have are really similar, the chances are that something went wrong in your development of them. Did you really interview, research, observe a number of people that could all be represented by the same persona? There are lots of people looking for solutions to problems, and this isn't necessarily a one-to-one relationship. So somebody might be buying your product for its functionality, so it takes great photos or it speeds up their tax returns. And others might be buying for its ability to increase their social standing, so it's a cool brand or it's a luxury experience, etc. If we take the specific example of a games console, one of you might be buying it because you're a gamer, but another one of you might be buying it because you're trying to keep your children entertained. Each of you is different, and you'll have different demands of the product. You have different problems to solve. And they occur in the stages before you buy, when you use, and when you're looking for a replacement for that product. This really boils down to a technique that people describe as jobs to be done, or a concept that people describe as jobs to be done. There's very little chance that one persona will capture all the essential information about your entire customer or user base. And so having different personas and a difference between those personas means that you have somewhere to anchor the really hard decisions about your product on. If your personas are all the same, then your decisions are easy, and product management isn't really about easy decisions.
So if at this point you have questions, feel free to just post them, and we'll try to do our best to answer at the end. About how do we overcome some of these challenges and how do we make personas work for us and for our teams. These are the main tips that we traditionally give. So just reading through them, it's identifying the problem that needs to be solved, observe and interview your customers or users, develop the personas, refine personas. But we'll go a little bit more in depth about how we do that. So to start, how can we identify the problem better?
So we've touched upon this a few times already. How do you do this? Well, it's research. It's uncovering the pains and the gains and the jobs to be done of your users and your customers. Companies, brands, organizations, everybody right now is talking about being customer-centric or using human-centered design or design thinking to build better products. If you're building a persona, you're likely to have picked a problem to solve already. And the first step in building that persona is to clearly state the problem that user is having, and also look for some evidence that can support as well as challenge that point of view. You know you have it when you can clearly answer the question, what is the problem or the manifestation of the problem, and who can you talk to if you need to learn more about that problem?
Next one, observe and interview. So we really want to learn from behaviors and attitudes of your users, right? So to really understand the problem, this is what we need to explore better. Make sure that you have time set aside to observe and to interview your users, your customers, because it's the only way to really draw on insights that you need to have to build the products that they want. So as a rule of thumb, we traditionally say 8 to 10 people that you need to interact with to start building a decent enough amount of insight and of data to create something. But this is a step that you definitely need to make. Is go and talk and observe and see how they interact with your service, or how are they currently solving the problem that you want to solve.
The next step after doing some of this research is to actually develop personas. So your question might be, how do you do this? Well, based on the insights that you've generated, you should start to collate and distill the information that you've collected. So looking at the similarities and the observations that you've made in the different range of people that you've seen, and where are the differences in the people that you've researched? What's the differences in the information that you've collected? As a rule of thumb, you might want to have 8 or 10 people who present a similar behavior and attitude to represent a single persona. You wouldn't necessarily solve a problem if there's only one person experiencing it. And again, going back to the problem centricity of personas, it's important to create personas that focus on specific problems, and ensuring that you also capture the context within which that problem exists, the why behind that problem. A tip for starting out is to make sure that you have at least one persona, and we definitely encourage more than that. To the point we made earlier, designing a product for a single person is relatively easy, but trying to balance the needs of multiple stakeholders and different types of users, that's the difficult bit.
So then the idea that data should always inform how you develop your persona. And as you develop your persona, you'll come up with solutions that you'll need to test. Those tests will generate more data from your interaction with the users. And the persona needs to be continuously refined as you collect more data and as you generate more insights. So make sure that you do this, because otherwise you have the risk of ending up with a persona that is not related to the insights that you've been collecting. And make them dynamic, right? So be aware of the context. The context changes a lot. Technology changes quickly. Political or economical aspects change really quickly nowadays. So personas must change as well. To build an interface right today that, let's say, about a touchscreen interface is considerably different to build one today than it was 10 years ago, as technology obviously has evolved. Consumers are now used to that kind of technology. So make sure that you're making the right questions and you are asking yourself constantly how those changes are impacting your users, and you do update your personas to reflect that.
So that's all we wanted to cover in the first part of this session. It being our first webinar of the year, we've obviously finished slightly earlier than the 30 minutes we promised you. The aim of this was to get you to better work with personas, and that doesn't necessarily mean go and make your own, although we'd actually love it if you did. We really wanted to make sure that you or anybody else watching this webinar in retrospect can go to your teams, go to your organization, and understand if they're using the right types of personas, and if they could do anything differently with them. Are they facing some of the challenges that we described, and could they benefit from approaching things differently? We hope we've helped out with that, and if you want to learn more about how we do it, you can check out the online course that we've just put up on our website. And there's a free section of that that's available, which covers persona development specifically. We also cover personas in our product management workshops, which are traditionally for product owners and product managers. They're really focused on the idea of bringing an idea to life. That's why we call them labs, where besides personas, you'll end up developing business models, running experiments, and creating prototypes. So you can see the links up there. The next part of this session was all about answering some questions. So I'm going to dive in and see what we've got on here, and Pedro and I will do our best to react as quickly as we can to these questions. So you ready for the first one, Pedro? Sure. So I've got one here that says, how do personas link with customer journeys?
So it's an interesting one, right? So as Mark was saying, you need to have different types of personas. You might want to build different customer journeys for different types of personas, depending on the type of service or product that you're building. A customer journey, if there is that need, a customer journey needs to be designed specifically. So let me think about an example of how that might differ.
Well, the customer journey for somebody coming to your website to research something is completely different from the customer journey of a returning customer who just wants to log in and check their latest updates in their account. So they'll have two different use cases for the website, and so you should be able to represent them differently. So personas linking with customer journeys, if they're a new customer, they'll go on a different journey to an existing customer, and if they're let's pick a different, if they're trying to solve a different problem to another subset of your users, then they may well go on a different journey too. So it's important to make sure that you know, particularly when you start designing your customer journeys, which customers are going to be experiencing those and what they then link into next.
Yep.
I hope that helps. Here's another question. So this one is about how do personas link with user stories? So again, I'll take this one, Pedro. Linking with user stories. So user stories are obviously a tool to describe user needs. The personas should describe broadly the problems and the characteristics of the people experiencing those problems. But beyond that, when you come to write user stories, you should really target your user stories at either one or many of your personas, depending on how well they fit the same issue. You're gonna want to create the connections for the developers that are picking up those user stories with the customers that are having those problems. So right up front, when we spoke about personas and we said what they're really useful for, we said that they're useful for helping people empathize with the user, and so that's where linking a user story to a persona can really bring that persona to life.
Any more questions? Feel free to keep posting questions at this moment.
Okay, so we've got another one here. That's a shame. So somebody has said, looks like a very interesting and relevant webinar. Will it be made available online? I have a problem with my audio. We have recorded this and we will be publishing the update of that. Unfortunately, we can't account for every single technical challenge that people might hit. But sorry that you did have that problem. Another question here is that is there a specific technique that's helpful if you have two personas that are similar?
Well, first thing is to really understand why that happened. So if the personas are really similar, is that because not enough research was made, or is it just that is the service or the apologies, the service or the product that you're building ends up having a really narrow user base and use case as well. So that might be one case. If that's not the case, then it's just a matter of trying to stretch your research to the extremes and see, for example, to give you an example, I can give you an example about how nowadays old people in their 70s are way more active than they used to be. So how do we build for people in their 70s that are way more active, but they still have some limitations in terms of mobility? There's 70-year-old people that are doing bungee jumping. So these are extreme cases that we want to look at, and also the ones that are barely doing any activity. So the thing is, look for the extremes. What are the extremes in your for your users or your problem, and see if you can figure out any more information that will help you with that.
That's a really good point, actually, Pedro. I think oftentimes people end up developing a rather vanilla or generic version of a product that kind of hits a few people's needs, doesn't necessarily fully satisfy them, and by taking the extreme view, you can look at where you might want to stretch your product to or your service to. Even if you think about services like gym memberships, for example, like you'll have a very different set of criteria for people who are present during the day and don't work during the day than people who just work like the standard 9 to 5. Great. Another question is, how do you manage personas? How do you manage personas when you offer different products with different journeys? So you have overall brands, but with different, I'm reading this out loud, so, but other different products with different challenges. How do you manage that? So if I've interpreted that correctly, that's how do you manage the overall personas of the people that buy products from your brand versus the individual groups of people that buy products from different product lines? I think I've split that up correctly.
Yeah, if that's kind of right. So are they marketing personas or are they user personas, right? If they're marketing personas, you should really have one per product or per product line. If they're user personas, you should have one per problem that you're trying to solve. If I understood the question correctly.
There's another one here. So from an agile point of view, if I have multiple personas, should I develop for each iteratively? If so, which one first? So this sounds like a prioritization question. And there are different types of users. So there are some users that you may well be either more comfortable with, or you might have a stronger relationship with, or you might have a more trusting relationship with. In which case, if you're trying a new version of a product or a service, you might get those guys on board first. They could be your beta users or your alpha users. The second instance, if you'd already identified some clear personas in your market and you thought, well, I want to go after these 5 groups of people, but I don't know which one first. It depends what's important to you. If you want to make the maximum amount of revenue, design it for the group that has the greatest potential in that instance. If you want to minimize your risk, design it for the group that's the smallest so you can validate things earlier on. Great, we just got a thumbs up on the answer to the previous question as well, so that's great. Another question we've had here is, can you give an example of how a persona which is useful for an engineering team could also help a marketing team? So I think this talks back to the user design personas that we mentioned right up front, Pedro.
I don't know if this answer is going to help a lot, but let me try to give you one that is interesting. So there was an issue with a company that was doing deliveries. So their drivers were having a ton of problems finding the right routes to deliver their whatever they were delivering, and that caused a lot of delays, a lot of unsatisfied clients, and there was that problem needed to be solved from a user design perspective, and the engineering team understood that there was an issue with the hardware and software that those drivers were using. It was way too complex. And once they figure out that, and they figure out the different type of personas that they had as drivers and how they could design the hardware and software to make it better, they understood that they needed to change their recruitment plan, they needed to change their training plan, and they allowed them to better target their users and market their users afterwards, because they start having drivers with a certain set of characteristics that were massively different. So that kind of reduced the number of complaints, and those drivers were still assets and something that could be marketed to clients. So I think that sort of helps, hopefully.
Another question here is, how much time should one spend developing personas, and when will I know that I'm done? So the answer to the second part is that you'll never be done, really, because unless you are only running an event and you have a persona for that event, you'll want to change your product and the marketing of that product over time, because appeal will change and consumer behaviors will change. Equally, if you have 5 personas and you're trying to split the difference between them, again, as we spoke about just previously, another technique that you could use really to get to the bottom of that is the 5 whys. So continue asking why of yourself and of your users and interrogating the data that you've had to get to a better understanding of the differences between those groups of people.
And to add to that as well, when you start having, so if you're building the personas through research and interviews and other types of research, you'll get to a point where you're getting the same answers over and over again. And at this point, you know that you have a robust set of data that you're kind of set for that persona until something happens that changes the context or changes the way that users interact with the product or whatever they are interacting with. So whenever you start having the same kind of answers and same kind of data over and over again, you're in a good spot.
We have another question here. So you seem to be using the word customer and user interchangeably. In a B2B world, they're different. So how does this work? I think one of the most important things to understand is that personas are a tool to help you develop empathy with people that can't necessarily be there. The most obvious case of that is, somebody developing a product and they're away from their customers. They need a way to develop empathy with those people. But they aren't the only stakeholder that matters in the picture of getting products to market. You have other employees, senior and junior. You have suppliers. You might even have shareholders. And you certainly have your customers and your end users. Now, balancing the priorities of all these different groups is something that a persona can help you do, because you can build the persona of the buyer in the organization, so whoever's commissioning the service from you, as well as the user. And their needs will be different, and you may be able to address their needs with different parts of the product. So the buyer, their needs might be addressed in the sales pitch or the product brochure or the service catalog, and the user's needs will be addressed in the user information manual or the training or the actual service that they consume. So having personas for different groups of people in an organization is an absolutely brilliant way of uncovering, or at least making sure you address the problems that your users are having. Another question here. So obviously, as we've talked about, some of the challenges are not having enough data or just building proto-personas which are built on previous experience and assumption. The question we've just been asked is, what research methods do you find are the most helpful? I have mine, but I'm going to let Petro
Yeah.
answer his first.
So observation and interviewing, I think, are critical.
Can I ask why?
Even it's just, well, there are a couple of reasons, right? There's things that you can draw from what's not said, so that thing about uh, whatever percentage of communication is not non-verbal. You can really draw things from just looking at the gestures that people do, how their face expressions when they talk about certain types of things. So those are really useful. Even website interaction, right? It's completely different to see a heat map, which is also a really good tool to use. But that's completely different from watching someone using the tool and becoming frustrated and reacting a certain way, or just getting impatient. That's not easy to be done in any other way that it's not um, looking at someone or talking to someone. So those would be the main ones for me.
And why do you like interviewing as well? Like, what's the main advantages of interviewing?
It's the interviewing is where people end up, they like to talk about their experience with things, and you end up uncovering things that are seemingly unrelated to the problem, what you thought the problem was, and you end up uncovering things that are nuggets, gold nuggets that you can take and completely change the way you do things, because you never know what you get out of a conversation. You have no other way of generating those insights if you're not just allowing people to speak.
We have sort of touched upon this in the conversation previously, but another question is who should be involved in developing the personas? Um, and you know, again, I think it's really important to understand that they're a tool to help you develop empathy. Um, and so if you haven't been involved in the process of creating them, somebody's going to have to help explain to you why they exist and why the differences are there, as well as the work that's gone into it. So you can think of it as again, the third party example. If you outsource the development of your personas, you're going to want to understand the why and the reasons why they were produced and the reasons why the insights were gathered. Secondarily, if you're then presenting those personas to somebody else, you're going to be responsible for telling them how you went about developing them, what techniques you used to capture all that data, and how you were able to then make some decisions about the product based on that.
And just to add on that, while it's a difficult technique to master, if you just go out and talk to your users, do some research, and we cover that on our courses and as well on how to do interviews, you will be surprised of what kind of results you can actually achieve without being a master on using those kind of tools.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Another one here is how many issues or pain points should you have per persona? It's a good question.
Well, I've never limited any to any number. Obviously, there's prioritization of what's more important, but I don't think I've ever set a limit to that. I think all information is good information. Then what do you choose to address? It really depends on, I guess, how much value does it bring.
I mean, you get examples of products being built with minimal feature sets all the time, and it is a case of prioritizing the jobs to be done. So, what are the most important things for somebody to have in their latest smartphone versus, the third, fourth, fifth generation of that? What are the things that people are looking for right now that absolutely have to be solved before you can then add the additional surprising and delighting features? So that's a reasonable way of approaching that problem. I'm just looking through the questions now. Would you believe we've got one more question here. So how do you focus your persona on specific user problems objectively? I think personas are inputs to the solution design process. So how do you decide which problems are not useful prior to designing the solution? Good question, and I think it speaks to the point at which you would engage with a persona in the life cycle of developing a solution. Pedro, do you have any views?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Can you repeat the question? So at which point in the design process would you engage the persona? At which points would you use it? And how do you discard problems that you don't think are relevant?
So if you think about the process, we generally start with a rough idea of a problem that exists, right? Because that's how we are wired, and we have an idea of who we may want to talk to kind of learn more about that problem, what the solution might be. So you then go and do the interviews, do the observation, whatever research methods we use, and you build the personas from there. Right? And it's at that point that you kind of start designing solutions and using the personas to communicate with your team. What problems are you trying to solve?
Yeah, and let's be clear. Like if you've already started designing a solution and your personas change, you're going to want to input that into your next steps of development. Got another question here actually. So, how do you best share persona information with developers? I think this is something that a lot of people find challenging because, particularly when personas are developed in a separate part of the business, they generally don't get consumed as if they were produced on the doorstep of your team. I think it's really important to have a visual representation of the customer. In fact, in the example that Pedro described earlier of the delivery drivers, that engineering team actually had a cardboard cutout of a delivery driver so that they could help just keep them top of mind when they were building the solution. I think it's good to have them visually displayed, and it's good to talk through them and explain exactly how you got to them.
And if they're still struggling, if you feel that there's still some lack of empathy or not enough empathy, well, it only takes you, or shouldn't take you more than a couple of hours to go out and have them talk to those people, to whoever your persona is representing, and that might help as well.
Yeah. We've got a couple more questions that have just come in. So whose job is it to build the persona? Is it the product owner's job?
Whose job is it to build a persona? Well, this really depends on how teams are structured. I think the product owner, product manager should be leading the effort. But then if you have design research people, if you're outsourcing, everyone should be involved at some point, if possible, if that's not too utopic, I guess. But definitely the product manager or the product owner should be leading the effort.
I certainly agree with that. I think the people in charge of the destiny, the vision of that product should be the ones that are leading the development of personas, and if they're not, then they definitely should be picking that task up. There's two more questions actually, so I'll just go through. Do you use the same method to design personas for internal customers, i.e. staff, or would you use a different technique?
What was that?
Do you use the same process to build personas for internal users, like staff, as you would for external users, like customers?
Design personas, user personas, yes. I would use the same methods and techniques if obviously there's no internal objection to that.
I mean, it's valid, right? You're still trying to get to the same level of information. What jobs do you need to do? What problems are you trying to solve? And whilst it might seem a little bit funny interviewing your own colleagues or peers, you'd be surprised at the things that you're missing. So, walking in somebody else's shoes, like observing them. There's lots to be learned from doing that. So that's a good one. Do you have any advice on if you are outsourcing the creation of personas?
Yes, make sure that you have someone in your team closely following that process. Make sure that they are doing and they are trying to uncover what the problem really is, because sometimes some research firms have their own way of working, which is a really valid way of working, but may not be addressing what you want to achieve. I don't know if you have any other advices, Mark, that you want to.
I mean, my preference would be for people internally to develop them, but I understand that to do a thorough job, you might well not have the capacity or resource to do it yourself. Having somebody follow the process, having somebody understand the genesis of those ideas, I think that's really important.
Constant communication, regular. As personas are being built, you need to know what kind of information is driving them, and everyone needs to be aware of that.
Yeah, yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
Is that all?
That's all our questions for today. So
we'll be running a couple more of these. So we'll be asking you once this obviously we'll be sending the webinar, the recording, and we'll also be asking a couple of questions. Mark, what were those?
Oh, so we're going to be asking questions about what you'd like to see next in the next webinars. We are hoping to do some more of these as we get our grip with the technology and the microphones and the sound, etc. We'll also be looking for your opinion on a few other things as well. I'm sorry to those of you who've had any audio issues. We've really enjoyed this first webinar of 2017, and we hope to see you again on another one soon. If you have any questions, you can get in touch with us via Twitter or via email. You can also visit our website to check out the courses and the products that we're currently offering right now. So thanks for your attention today. Look forward to seeing and hearing from some of you soon.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Pedro.